A millionaire found the black cleaner. Reading in the dark, the next moment shocked everyone. In the grand halls of the mansion, every room glittered with chandeliers, crystal lamps, and walls that shone with wealth. Yet there was one part of the house where shadows clung stubbornly. It was the service corridor, a place no guest ever visited, where the cleaners hurried through their duties. One evening, as the millionaire walked by, annoyed at the flickering bulb above, he caught sight of something that made him pause. In the dim light, a cleaner sat on the cold floor, hunched over a book so old its pages looked ready to tear. She pressed her finger against each line, mouthing the words as though she feared losing them to the silence. There was no lamp, no comfort, only a small slice of light slipping through a cracked window. For a moment he stood frozen, wondering why someone would choose to strain their eyes reading in the dark when the mansion held more light than anyone could ever use. He stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking against the marble, and she jolted, in fear, clutching the book to her chest like it was a forbidden treasure. His tone was sharp as he asked what she was doing, expecting some excuse about idleness. But when his eyes caught the open page, he frowned in surprise. These were not idle scribbles or a simple story. The pages were covered in equations, notes, and neatly underlined sentences. It was the kind of book that demanded effort, the kind of reading reserved for someone with ambition. She looked embarrassed, as though ashamed of being caught, yet the determination in her eyes betrayed her fear. She whispered that she studied in every spare minute, because education was the only escape she could imagine from the chains of poverty that bound her. The millionaire had spent years among boardrooms, investments, and contracts worth millions, but something about her words struck him differently. He had seen people chase wealth, power, and luxury, but here was a woman chasing light, knowledge that no one could strip away. Her dedication unsettled him, not because it was wrong, but because it revealed how much he himself had taken for granted. For the first time, he didn't see just a cleaner scrubbing his floors. He saw a fighter, a soul unwilling to surrender to the darkness around her. And then came the moment that left the mansion whispering for days. Instead of scolding her, instead of ordering her back to work, he left without a word, only to return carrying a lamp and a form. He set the lamp gently beside her and told her she would never have to read in shadows again. The form he placed in her hands was a scholarship application, one that could change her life forever. The other staff who passed by stood frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. A simple act of compassion had turned the servants' corner of the mansion into a place of hope. That night, wealth did not shine brightest in gold or diamonds. It shone in the quiet glow of a lamp illuminating the pages of a book, and in the heart of a woman whose determination had finally been seen. The millionaire's curiosity quickly shifted into suspicion as he drew nearer, the echo of his polished shoes cutting sharply through the silent corridor. The cleaner jolted, her back stiffening, as if the sudden sound of authority had pierced her moment of peace. He demanded to know what she was doing there, his voice laced with the kind of sharpness that made servants shrink. For a brief second, panic flashed across her face, and with trembling hands she hugged the book tightly against her chest as though shielding something far too precious to be exposed. He expected a weak excuse, perhaps some nervous stammer about wasting time, but his eyes caught a glimpse of the pages before she could shut them. What he saw surprised him enough to stop his reprimand mid-breath. The book was not a casual novel meant for passing hours. It was filled with mathematical formulas, scientific explanations, and underlined notes, every page carrying marks of effort, as though the words had been wrestled with late into the night. Sentences were circled, margins filled with tiny scribbles, and certain problems carried faint smudges from repeated attempts to solve them. This was no ordinary reading. It was the work of someone deeply committed to learning, someone who refused to let ignorance define their future. He found himself staring at her with a mixture of confusion and intrigue. In the dim light of the corridor, her face glowed faintly with determination, though her eyes betrayed fear of being punished for daring to dream. It struck him then how much contrast existed in this moment. He, a man with more wealth than he, could ever spend, had never struggled for access to knowledge, while she, who scrubbed floors and carried buckets, fought silently for every scrap of understanding in the dark. His sternness began to fade, replaced by a reluctant respect that he was almost too proud to admit. She lowered her head and whispered softly, explaining that she had no other time to study, no other space where she could open her books without judgment or ridicule. Her voice trembled, but the conviction behind her words was unshakable. She said education was her only way forward, her only weapon against a life that tried to confine her. The millionaire listened, though he tried to mask the storm rising inside him. Her words echoed in his mind louder than any deal he had ever struck. In his boardrooms, he thought about how often he had dismissed those who worked for him, never once considering that beneath the uniforms and the silence, there might be people carrying dreams just as grand as his. In her, he saw not just a cleaner, but a fighter. Someone, clawing her way through the shadows, armed only with knowledge and persistence. For the first time, he felt that the grandeur of his mansion, with its glittering lights and golden walls, seemed strangely empty compared to the glow of determination shining in her eyes. For a long moment, the corridor was wrapped in silence, broken only by the soft hum of the weak bulb above. The millionaire stood still, the reprimand he had prepared caught in his throat as his eyes lingered on the cleaner clutching her book like a lifeline. He felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, an unease that came not from anger but from the quiet strength he sensed radiating from her. Finally, almost against his own instincts, he asked the question he never imagined addressing to someone in her position. He asked her why. The word hung in the air, sharp yet strangely gentle, and she raised her eyes with hesitation, as if unsure whether to trust him with the truth. Then, with a fragile steadiness that grew stronger with each word, she explained. She said that education was her only way out, not just from the dark corner she sat in that night, but from the greater darkness that had followed her all her life, the shadows of poverty, the sting of judgment, and the invisible chains of limitation. Every spare moment she could steal between shifts was a chance to study, a chance to push back against the world that tried to keep her small. Her voice was low, but every syllable carried the weight of her determination. She spoke of nights spent, sneaking books borrowed from libraries, of mornings when exhaustion from cleaning floors made her hands ache, yet she still turned the pages. She confessed how she often dreamed of classrooms she could never afford, teachers she never had, and opportunities that seemed built for others but not for her. Yet she refused to surrender. She insisted that if she could keep reading, keep learning, then maybe one day she would step into the light that so many took for granted. The millionaire listened, his chest tightening with each word. He had heard countless speeches in boardrooms, powerful men boasting of their drive and ambition, but none of them had struck him the way this quiet confession did. Here was not ambition rooted in greed or pride, it was survival, hope, and courage woven together into something unbreakable. He thought about his own life, about how doors had always opened easily for him, how opportunity had been handed to him on silver trays. He had built empires, bought companies, and signed contracts worth millions, yet he had never fought for knowledge the way she was fighting for it in the dim corner of his mansion. The hunger in her eyes unsettled him, for it revealed something he had long forgotten, the purity of wanting to learn, not for profit or prestige, but for freedom. In that instant, he realized he was no longer looking at a cleaner. He was looking at someone braver than many of the leaders he had dealt with, someone who refused to let the darkness consume her. And, though he did not admit it out loud, he felt something inside him shift, an awakening that left him wondering if perhaps true wealth was not measured by gold or marble, but by the fire of determination burning in a soul that refused to be silenced. The moment that followed would forever be remembered in that mansion. The cleaner sat frozen on the cold floor, still clutching her book, certain that the next words from the millionaire would be harsh, a punishment for daring to use her time, in ways he might call wasteful. But instead of anger, there was a stillness in his expression, a heaviness that seemed to come from deep reflection. Without saying another word, he turned away and walked back through the long hallway, his footsteps fading into the echo of the grand house. She remained there, heart pounding, torn between fear and confusion, wondering what fate awaited her. Minutes later he returned, but not with the rage or dismissal she had expected. In his hands he carried a lamp, its light steady and warm, and in the other a set of papers folded neatly. He placed the lamp gently beside her, its glow instantly filling the corridor where shadows had always ruled. The brightness lit up her face, her book, and the small corner that had been hidden for so long. Then, with a voice firmer than the chandeliers above and softer than any order he had ever given, he told her that she would never again read in. Darkness. She blinked, hardly able to believe his words, but the truth became clear when he handed her the papers. They were not contracts or rules, but a scholarship application, complete with his recommendation already written at the bottom. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the form, her eyes filling with tears that blurred the printed lines. The other staff members who had quietly gathered at the edge of the hall gasped, whispering in disbelief at the sight before them. For years, they had known the millionaire as a man of strict standards, one who measured everything by efficiency and wealth. Yet here he was, bending the image he had so carefully built, giving hope to someone who had been invisible in the grand mansion. Word spread quickly, moving from one servant to another, from the kitchen to the laundry room, until the entire house buzzed with shock. A cleaner who had once hidden her studies in shadows was now openly acknowledged, supported, and given light, in the truest sense. As the glow of the lamp filled the corridor, something shifted within the walls of that house. It was no longer just a mansion of wealth and pride, but a place where compassion had found its way into the heart of power. The millionaire, who had always surrounded himself with glittering chandeliers, found himself humbled by the brilliance of determination that no crystal could ever match. And the cleaner, who once studied in secret, now carried the promise of a future brighter than anything the mansion had ever offered her. The true treasure uncovered that night was not hidden in safes or bank accounts. It was the unstoppable spirit of a woman who refused to stop learning, and the moment when someone finally decided to see her worth.